Okay, welcome to part 2 of my lecture on chapters 7 and 8. And what I've done here is I've gone back to my original example, which is really what I want to show you, but I didn't want to do this until we got through the concept of a nested loop, what happens to the outermost loop and the innermost loop and all that. Essentially what I've done here is I've set it up where I subtract one off rows and columns so that I'll get the same output I have up here. That's all. I had the right number of rows and columns, I just didn't have it, I didn't take time to think it through. Typical for not doing the logical design. But anyway, what I've got here is I've got a C out and a C in. I've got a variable up here at the top called horizontal and vertical. In other words, what we're going to do is we're actually going to give the user the ability to tell us how many rows and columns they want. So that's basically it. Now you'll see this very same kind of a thing, and I think it's project 8 where you're doing your multiplication tables. I think it's 8, could be 9. In any event, this is very similar to what you'll be doing, and I will give you some help on getting started on that one because it's a little tough. But anyway, it's going to ask for the number of rows, and it's going to put that in there, and it's now putting it into L. It's going to ask for the number of columns, and since this is row major order, we're going to be looking at every column individually first, and then for every column, we're going to be looking at every row. Okay, so the inside is the columns, and that's the row, and then for every one of those pairs, it's going to output these coordinates here. And I'll run it to do basically 4 columns and 3 rows first. Then I'll run it again and we'll change it, let the user decide. All right, so rerun it. Okay, so there's that, F10. Okay, enter the number of rows. I'm going to put 3 and enter, let's see, F10 again. I'm debug mode. And enter the number of columns. I want 4 columns, vertical columns. All right, so what I'm going to do here, what I did, just to show you, is I set the maximum number of rows to horizontal, which is what they gave me, up here, and the maximum number of columns to vertical. So basically, they're telling me how many they want. And instead of putting a hard number here, I'm putting the variable into which I placed, using the CIN statement, the number given me by the user. All right, so I'm going to press F5. See what happens here. So as you can see, there's 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. There are my 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, and there are my 3 rows. All right. So now let me go in here. I'm going to take this out, and let's try it with a different matrix. Let's try 7 rows and 10 columns. There you go. So it's dynamically. Whoa, that didn't work, did it? Wait a minute. Might have went off the scale here. 10 columns. Yeah, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. Notice that I started at 0 intentionally so that I could show you these coordinates, because you always start at 0 when you're talking about this. Now, another thing I could have done is I could have set this to 0, right? Not put the -1 in there. And then did less than horizontal. I could also say less than or equal to horizontal or vertical -1. I could have done that. You might want to play around with that. Let's see what happens when I do it this way. Number of rows, let's do 5 and 5. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Okay, so it's working. I could have said less than or equal to. Let's try this and see if I'm right about it. I don't want to leave you hanging here. -1. And you can do this with arrays and things like that. You might see this as something you'll need to remember. You can do the math here if you want to. So I'm doing horizontal -1. That's probably going to give me 1 less. Let's see what we get. I should get the same thing. Number of rows 5 and 5. And I do get the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So as you can see, there are various ways to set this up. If you need to start at 0, there are ways to do it and still come up with the same outcome. Typically, you always start at 0 for array structures, databases, and things, because there's always an index 0, and that's why they do that. And that's also why they call this the off by 1 error, because if you look at this up here, this is very typical. How many columns do I have? Well, if column is vertical, the user would say, okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 columns. That's right. What's the highest index up here of the last column? It's not 4, it's 3. All right. The reason for that is there's always one less as far as the index than there are the number of elements or columns in here. So if I've got 4, then I just subtract 1 from it, and that gives me the highest index. The reason for that is we're starting at 0. 0 is a number. If I count the number of digits here, I got 0, 1, 2, 3. That's 4 digits. Same thing with the rows. How many rows do I have? I have 3 rows. What's the highest number of the row or index? Well, it's 1 less than the number of rows. 1, 2, 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. I still have 3 digits. It's just they stop because I started at 0. So you'll see that quite a lot. We'll get into that when we get into arrays and looping and that sort of thing. All right, this should be enough to help you out or confuse you thoroughly. Hopefully it's the former, not the latter. And I will see you in class. Thanks.